Hi, my name is Mike Dillard, and this is Self-Made Man, the podcast for men who want to leave their mark on the world and create a legacy of honor, integrity, and achievement in every aspect of their lives. I'm glad you're here, and once again, it is time to forge your destiny. So what do you actually need in order to create a scalable, high-growth business, the kind of startup that you read about in the news? Well, today we're going to find out as we sit down with one of the most influential people in Silicon Valley, Mr. David S. Rose. So David is a serial entrepreneur and an angel investor. He's the founder and chairman of New York Angels, which is one of the world's most prolific angel investment groups. He's the founder of Gust.com, Gust.com, which has helped connect startups with over $1.8 billion in capital from investors. And he's also an associate founder of Singularity University alongside Peter Diamandis, which is a post-grad school sponsored by NASA and Google, where he created its finance, entrepreneurship, and economic programs. In other words, this is an incredibly special opportunity to learn about the art of the startup from one of the most qualified teachers in the world. You will not want to miss this, so please help me welcome David S. Rose. All right, welcome back, everybody. Mike Dillard here, and today I am super excited about our guest because this is a topic that we have yet to cover here on Self-Made Man. It's one that I am starting to get much more involved with on a personal level, and frankly, we have one of the godfathers of the angel investing world with us. And so we are joined today by Mr. David S. Rose. So David, thank you so much for taking the time. I really do appreciate this.
Hey, it's my pleasure, Mike.
So David, you've got an unbelievable resume, if you will, as far as your role that you have played when it comes to the world of Silicon Valley, when it comes to startups, when it comes to your role in setting up the entrepreneurial school at Singularity University. You have quite an accomplishment list. Could you take us back to, a decade or two ago? How did you get started down this path?
Oh, I actually got started quite a bit longer than a decade or two ago. I am remarkably fortunate to have come from an entrepreneurial family. My father is an entrepreneur, and it goes back several generations. So I started my first business when I was in grade school. And it was then that I decided that I could actually help the world and do well for myself. As a matter of fact, my father just published a book last year called Making a Living, Making a Life. And I thought that was a very good mantra. So my first business was Rose Productions, a multimedia organization. And we created marketing communication materials. And my client was my brother, who was a magician who performed for children's birthday parties at school. And so I convinced him, being a good salesman, that he, of course, as a performer, required business cards and headshots and brochures and posters and all kinds of other accoutrements. And so we, of course, supplied them at an appropriate fair market price. The only slight challenge was that after about a year or so, my one client realized the sum total of his revenue is equal to the sum total of my revenues. And there was a slight problem in this operation. So I lost my client. But I then went on to start additional companies in high school, college, graduate school, getting out of graduate school, and had a number of careers along the way, starting companies on the side and then eventually full-time. So with my business school professor, I actually started one of the world's first computer training companies called the Computer Classroom back in 1983. To tell you how far back that was, we were teaching people how to use these things called spreadsheets like VisiCalc and word processing programs. And so I then from there started my first software company in 1988. And that got really, really big, turned into a big company during the dot-com boom.
Would we recognize the name? Was it B2B or B2C?
It was B2C. It was called Air Media Live, and it was the world's first wireless internet broadcasting company. So we created a device, the hardware device, that would plug into your computer and receive wireless transmissions from the internet. So if you had email or sports scores or news stories or things like that, would come into this news capture, this little black pyramid that would plug into your computer. And it was on the cover of PC Magazine. Walt Mossberg did a full Wall Street Journal column on it. It actually came in as the second for the best product of the year in the Cody Awards, the first being that year being Internet Explorer from Microsoft. But Microsoft actually changed IE4 so we could feed the browser with these wireless communications. And it was really a great product. Fortunately, it was way ahead of its time. So we had all kinds of awards and kudos, and And the customers who bought it were really happy. Unfortunately, there weren't enough of them. And so we sort of crashed and burned, and we had to restart the company. But this time we did it right, and we restarted as a back end for all of this mobile wireless internet stuff that was happening. And so we did everything from ringtones to mobile news services and the like. And this time, because we weren't tied to a single particular hardware or a single particular news source, it was a really great idea. And we got really big, really fast, and hit the total .com boom at its height. This time, nothing could go wrong. Unless the entire world somehow suddenly crashed simultaneously, both the computing, internet, and mobile computing. And so when that happened, that was challenging, to say the least. So I was then sidelined. Then there's actually something even bigger than the crash when it comes to starting a company, and that's known as the spousal authority. So in my particular case, the spousal authority said, you're grounded, no more starting companies. So I was taken off the field and became an investor. So as an angel investor, I then helped to fund a number of startups during the so-called nuclear winter after the dot-com crash. And I founded a group called New York Angels, which is one of the largest business angel investment groups in the world, most active. Then finally, being in the intersection of entrepreneurship and angel investing, and with Singularity University, the whole future studies of where the world is going, it became obvious to me that there was a one-time opportunity to create a platform to be at the epicenter of all of these startup entrepreneurs and early stage investors and the like. And so I finally got permission from the spousal authority to get back into the water and start a new company. And so I started a company called Gust, G-U-S-T, Gust.com. And so today, a dozen years later, Gust is the infrastructure platform for the whole world of high growth early stage startups. So we have nearly 400,000 companies on the platform globally who use Gust to find and collaborate with the early stage business angel investors and seed funds, accelerators, and venture capital funds who fund them. And we've got over 50,000 of them on the platform. And so over the last decade, we've tracked over $1 billion in investments in these companies.
Are there minimum requirements to participate in this as an investor?
So in the U.S., we have something called accredited investor status. Mm-hmm. And so that means that so any company can, of course, sell shares of itself to anybody who want to. And that's what you have a public stock market for. So if you have a company and you want to sell shares to anybody, you register with the SEC, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, and you file for a public offering. And then anybody can call up their stockbroker and buy shares from you. However, if you're a small company and you don't want to go through all the filing and the very expensive IPO, initial public offering, you can sell your shares privately, but the SEC says that if you're going to do that, and if you're not going to file all that public stuff for registration, you can only sell to people who are exempt from requiring you to register. And that means almost entirely people called accredited investors. An accredited investor, very basically, is somebody who has enough money so they can afford to lose everything they're investing in your company, which typically means, according to the SEC's definition, either $1 million in net assets, not including the value of your home, or over $200,000 a year in steady income, or $300,000 if you file jointly with your spouse. So if you meet either of those income or asset tests, you are then an accredited investor and you can invest in startups.
And have you had any really big home runs? I'm assuming so, but that you'd be willing to talk about or share.
Oh, well, I've been very lucky. I've been investing, as I said, for quite a few years. We've had during that time exits to Facebook and Amazon and Intel and Google and a bunch of really interesting folks. Probably the best known was a company called Comixology, which was the leading platform for comic book aficionados and collectors, which we sold to Amazon and it's still the world's leading comic book center, but except it's now functioning as a division of Amazon. The most successfully lucrative was a company called Pond5, which was the world's leading online marketplace for video stock footage, video clips that you can include in your own movies and stuff. And that was acquired when they came to us about 8 years or so ago for an investment. I did the original investment that I led for New York Angels. They had gotten the entire company up and operating with a working website, generating revenue, with a full management team for a grand total of $20,000, which just shows how far the world has come when you can get that big company for that little money. And then New York Angels, I led the deal. We invested $500,000 as the first investment in the company. The company did not take another dime of money. They just used that to grow and bootstrap for the next 6 or 7 years until they were finally acquired for well over $100 million valuation, which ain't bad.
Not at all. Not at all. This is a topic that I have a ton of interest in personally, as we briefly discussed for about 30 seconds before we started today's episode. I'm working with some mutual friends of ours. So who, just for your information to the audiences, are unknown. I haven't announced that yet. On a product in a company that is designed to decentralize the ag industry and put clean, healthy food back on people's tables. And so far, I'm bootstrapping the development of all of this. And we're looking at launching in the first quarter of 2017. But
Mike, it so happens that there is a wonderful resource.
Well, exactly. And so I'm looking at a copy of, your new book, The Startup Checklist, 25 Steps to a Scalable High Growth Business. And I've got an unbelievable opportunity to speak to you right now in person to talk about what are the most important pieces for someone who's in a situation like mine. They've got a startup with a lot of potential. Maybe you've never taken on investors before. What do we need to know? What do we need to know about?
Well, the very first thing that I think you already know, but many people don't, is what's the difference between a small business and a startup, right? So both of them are small, technically. In theory, both of them had to start somewhere. But this book, The Startup Checklist, is designed for a very specific type of startup entrepreneur, one like you, somebody who is starting a company which is intended to grow really big. Now, in point of fact, the vast majority of the 25, 30 million companies in the United States are not going to be Twitter or Uber or LinkedIn or Facebook or Apple or Amazon, right? They are going to be a Main Street hardware store, a babysitting business, a consulting operation, a pool cleaner, or whatever. Perfectly great businesses that are Main Street businesses. Another term for them, not derogatory but accurate, is lifestyle businesses. They provide a really appropriate and economically healthy lifestyle for their entrepreneurs, and people can make millions of dollars a year off of those. But the businesses themselves were born and will ultimately remain, while successful, relatively small. On the other hand, if you take a look at a company like Uber, which goes from 0 to $70 billion in valuation in 4 years, that's a completely different type of business. Uber was not designed from the very beginning to be a business for one person to support that person's family. It was designed to get very, very big. So what are the hallmarks of one of these high growth businesses, a really scalable business? And the answer is that if you're going to be hiring employees, as opposed to being a dog walker yourself, that's one clue. If you are in an area where the assumption is that your employees are going to be compensated not only with cash, but also with equity, with shares of stock in the company, that's another very, very big clue, because you have to set up your business to allow you to do that. And then finally, if you figure that this is going to be a big enough, high growth enough company so that the returns at the end of the day, when you sell the company to a larger company or go public, are going to be big enough that it can provide a return to a high-risk investor, you are likely to take early-stage investment in from business angels or venture capital funds or accelerator programs, and then ultimately those investors are going to be looking for a very significant return. So if you're going to be one of these high-growth businesses that's going to likely have employees compensated with equity and investors and looking for an exit as your ultimate strategy at the end of the game, then there's a whole lot of stuff that you would better do right up front, because you are going to do it. And the only question is, do you do it right up front, inexpensively and painlessly, or do you do it wrong up front? And then the minute you get anybody who knows what they're doing involved, any investors, investment bankers, sophisticated employees, sophisticated customers, you got to go back and redo all the stuff you did wrong the first time. And that can be very painful and very expensive.
What are some of the most important qualities that successful founders have in common?
Well, and I actually write about this in the book as to what investors look for. And by the way, this is my second book. My first book was designed not for entrepreneurs, but rather for investors, the investors who invest in those entrepreneurs. It was called Angel Investing, the Gus Guide to Making Money and Having Fun Investing in Startups. And that was designed as and written as the textbook for the early stage investing industry. That also was a New York Times bestseller. And that's now the standard textbook for the early stage angel industry. And in there, when I advise investors what to look for in their entrepreneurs, the number one thing doesn't have to do with skills in operating a business or a giant market and stuff. It may be surprising to some people, but you know what the number one thing we look for in an entrepreneur is? Integrity. That's absolutely critical. And the reason, it sounds like a smushy kind of thing to say, like a feel good, go to church on Sundays kind of thing, but it's not. It's a very big business rule. And the reason for that is when as an early stage investor, we are putting money behind a startup. The startup obviously isn't there. It's all in the mind of the entrepreneur. That's why we're investing, to help grow this thing very, very big, take a phenomenon, turn it into a company. And that means that the entrepreneur is going to be making decisions every hour, every day, every minute. And if I can't 100% trust that entrepreneur, if I don't get 100% that this is a person of integrity, then I'll always be second guessing. Then every time there's a decision about anything, do this product, do that product, go on this trip, start this, appear at this conference, price X, Y, or Z, whatever, I'll never know whether the entrepreneur is thinking of him or herself foremost or thinking of the company foremost. So that's why integrity that is absolutely rock solid is critical to me.
How do you come to judge the integrity of a person?
Well, we're not always perfect, and it is tough, and people typically don't wear it on their sleeve, although some people do. But when you spend as much time as you can talking to somebody, looking at, checking their references, looking back on their lives. And so, we look at who else is backing this person. Did they do a friends and family round? I mean, did their family, who've known them for a lot longer than I have, people who've known them for decades, are they willing to actually write a check because they love this person or respect this person? That's an indication. I typically ask an entrepreneur to give me their whole background, literally from the day they were born, where they grew up, where they went to school and high school and college, graduate school, and how they started the company and their careers and so on and so forth. And in doing that, what I'm always listening for are the inflection points. When they change from A to B, when they left high school and applied to college, when they moved to another city, when they decided to start a business. And I'm thinking, why? What was it that triggered that? And I'm listening to what they tell me in the way of stories about people they've dealt with, other investors. If somebody is complaining, all the other investors they had tried to screw them all the time, is it possible? Sure. Is it likely? Not necessarily that every investor you had before tried to screw you, right? So somebody like that, or if somebody takes great pleasure in pointing out to me, how they did something tricky and borderline legal to screw their investors, then obviously that doesn't speak high integrity. Or even things like business models, for example, stored value cards where they rely on breakage, of people not using it or forgetting it, and where each month a little bit of the money is drained out of the card until it's down to zero. That's a basic business model that's not based on high integrity kind of stuff. So you try and use every cue you have, and you can get about the business and the person and their background, because that's just so critical. And so, if that's the first innate characteristic, the next clue, the biggest clue that I look for as to whether this person is somebody I'm willing to bet on is, have they started something before? And it turns out that if you are a real entrepreneur, now, some people don't turn to be an entrepreneur until they get to be, in middle age or even older. Age is absolutely no barrier to being an entrepreneur. I mentioned that I come from a long line of entrepreneurs. Back during the dot-com boom in 1999, I was a finalist for the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year Award. My father won it in 2003. He's now 87 years old, and he is still active, functionally active. He's actually my partner, along with my daughter, in an accelerator program. We run a technology accelerator program for companies in the real estate industry. He's developing shopping centers in Ghana, flying around the world, giving speeches. So age is no limit. But if somebody comes to me as a startup entrepreneur at age 45, and I look back, and for 45 years, they've never started anything, never taken initiative, done everything, that's a really big, flashing, telltale sign. Because every entrepreneur I know, whether they've just starting a company for the first time at 45 or the first time at 15, I can look back at their lives, and they started, if not a company, they started a charitable program, a youth walk. They started they were, captain of the football team. They started a book club. They did, anything where they had an idea and they got something done, and they somehow convinced or inspired other people to join them and rally around for it. And if somebody has that kind of background, that's a pretty good clue that they're an entrepreneur.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's interesting. I'm a part of a peer group here in Austin called Tiger 21. And we meet once a month. There's about 10 of us in our chapter here. And we're all entrepreneurs. We're all business owners. And we have an opportunity to see some of the hottest startup opportunities around the country, 2 or 3 one time a month when we have our meetings. And we just had it yesterday. Saw another 2 or 3 startups. And one of my biggest personal things that I look for is, does the founder know how to sell? Have they already successfully sold something in the past? Because it's one thing to have an idea, and it's one thing to maybe have some technical expertise, but do you know how to market your product and service and actually produce a sale at the end of the day? How does that figure into your evaluations?
Sales is important. Even more important than sales is communication, right? If you can communicate clearly. Some people are not natural salespeople, but you have to have that drive. Entrepreneurs are to a very large extent, there's a crossover between salespeople. So you have to have somebody who can communicate and inspire. Now, you don't have to be a used car salesman, but you have to be able to effectively let people know that you have confidence in yourself, that you're doing something really special, that you want them involved. So I want somebody who can clarify that, make that really apparent to me, even if they're not a traditional sales manager type or a cold caller. Entrepreneurs are driven, passionate people who have total faith in their vision and who will do whatever it takes to get people to adopt it.
So when it comes to the 25 steps in the book, where do you typically have business owners start?
Well, as they said in Sound of Music, let's start at the very beginning. So for those who don't like to read long books, the preface to the book is actually a condensed version of all 25 steps, and it takes you through, one after another, boom, 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 boom. And then we go into greater detail so you can dive in or out to the actual chapters themselves as they are relevant. So I would say that one of the things that I've learned over a 30-plus year career, 35-year career in business is paradoxically to get started much faster but start much slower. So say, what does that mean? And the answer is, historically, I would go charging in and start something up without thinking about what I was doing. Because as an entrepreneur, I want to just go, go, go. Your switch is always set on overdrive 100% of the time. And it turns out that if you actually sit down before you start and take the time to plan, if you use one of these tools like the business model canvas or the lean startup methodology tools, you can actually think through what you're doing. Write a live plan. It's a great website called liveplan.com from Tim Berry, who wrote the Business Plan Pro software. If you plan out what you're doing, it helps you avoid a lot of mistakes and focus your energies where they should be focused. That's number one. So plan it out first before you dive in. But paradoxically, don't plan too much. Just get something done so you have an idea of where you're going. And then instead of sitting there endlessly refining your plan and tweaking the small pieces and spending days or weeks or months going over the perfect plan, forget it. Just once you got your basic plan done, you know where you're heading, jump in and do it. Get started. That's the essence of the whole lean startup methodology. It's a great book by Eric Ries called The Lean Startup, which walks you through the whole process. And the goal there is to put something, anything, a minimum viable product out the door. That's the very, very least version, smallest version of something you've got that other people might be willing to pay for. And put it out there and see what happens. And some people are going to like it, hopefully, and some people will hate it, likely. In which case, try and take the good things, improve the bad things, and try it again and iterate it and see what happens. So build, measure, build, test, measure, and you keep going in cycles. And that's how you build something that the market really needs effectively in real time.
So one of the biggest challenges that I ran into in my last company, and I'm now at this inflection point again with this new one, is it better to build the tech infrastructure, the CRM and cart and all of that stuff, for where you're going, where your vision is, let's say 3 to 5 years from now, and put it on a Salesforce or a Magento level platform and to put that money and time into setting that up now? Or is it better to go with a much lower end lean system that you'll eventually outgrow and there'll be a switching cost associated to it?
Ah, that also is one of these paradoxes,
Mm.
and I discussed that actually in the book, because one of the problems that I have done again and again and again every time I start a company, and you think I would have learned at this point, but I really haven't, is I always overbuild, and I always, because I am so convinced, like every other entrepreneur, that I'm going to be a unicorn, right?
Right,
So that of course, when I put this product out there, I'm going to have 10 million people beating on my door to jump onto my website. Website's got to be able to sustain the entire population of the United States buy my product tomorrow morning. So if you do that, you tend to overbuild in your website. You tend to overbuild on all your stuff. You tend to take a long period of time to build everything you think is going to require to scale before you even get your first product out the door. And so that's the antithesis of the whole lean startup. That's trying to plan everything out and build it all at once to catch it. In many cases, that also goes to building an organization. So you build an organization with too many employees, too many salespeople, too many coders, and you'll be hemorrhaging money. And the one biggest thing I found is that the worst thing you can do is run out of money. And so therefore, if you're spending all that money and you're not being lean at all, you're just getting yourself set up for trouble. So my strong suggestion is do not overbuild. Start with your minimum viable product as lean as you possibly can, and then only when you have to do you want to build. That being said, the book specifically goes into great detail about all the amazing tools that are out there now, which are relatively inexpensive and would make you the envy of a mega multinational corporation as recently as 20 years ago. I mean, you now have available to you and to me and to all of your listeners tools that are, SaaS, software as a service tools that are available either for free or for a few dollars a month that are available to them that beat anything that a General Motors or an IBM had literally 20 or 30 years ago. That's what technology has done.
Totally agreed with you. Even over the last 5 years, it's been a dramatic shift. And, speaking of money, which you mentioned a minute ago, when is the ideal time to take on investment capital? Let's say you can launch it on your own. Should you ever take on investment capital? If so, when?
Well, the goal for taking on capital that you don't have is to help you grow faster than you would without it. Now, some businesses require venture capital or angel capital or other people's money before they can do anything at all. And those businesses tend to be pretty tough because the bar has been raised so high in recent years precisely because of all the things we were just talking about, because of all the tools that are available, the SaaS platforms that are available to help build your company on. Many of them are free. And so you'll pay only very small amounts of money on a monthly basis to use these extraordinary tools. And so if you can do all this stuff at no cost, then the expectation on the investor's perspective is that of course you will do that, and so therefore everybody who comes to them will be expected to leverage all that kind of stuff. So if there are 40 people, and angels typically invest in only 1 out of 40 deals and opportunities they see. If there are 40 entrepreneurs in front of me, and they all have leveraged these free and available tools and online stuff and somehow bootstrapped and gotten themselves to the point where they can show me something, they have some kind of traction, and you haven't, I don't care how good your idea is, why am I likely to take the extra risk that you can't even get to traction where they already have? So therefore, if you can avoid investors, do so. Start on your own. Don't go into debt day one. But when it comes time to have something to show, because investors want traction, and I discussed in the book, what that means typically. What do we look to see? Is it a minimum viable product? Is it customers? Is it some validation somewhere? Once you have that, then you're ready to go out and talk to investors.
When it comes to an exit, let's say that you're building your company with that in mind, that is an end goal. When do you know the time is best to take an offer?
That's always a challenge for entrepreneurs, because the best entrepreneurs are convinced that they can be bigger and bigger and bigger. Right? Mm-hmm. And one question is, how do I value my company? And I have a couple of chapters in the book discussing valuations and what that all means. But when I'm talking to entrepreneurs and I say, okay, if I offered you right now a little suitcase with $2 million in cash, and you can have this thing, give me the company, I will pay you $2 million in cash today for this company. And if their answer to that is they would accept it, then that's not what I'm going to invest my money at as an investor at that valuation. because I want somebody who is going to build a company that's going to grow and get much bigger than that, who's thinking much bigger than that. So the smart entrepreneurs are always thinking that their company's going to, the powerful is going to get bigger and bigger and better and better. And that being said, there are other factors. It's not just an entrepreneur. There are employees. There are other investors. There is the spousal factor and the family factor to include. So the right time will differ for each person. Some people, like a Bill Gates or a Steve Jobs or Mark Zuckerberg, will stay with the company until it's dragged out of their cold dead fingers. Other people, like a Pierre Omidyar, who founded eBay, will have an idea, bring on a professional staff, and get the heck out of the way. So everybody's timing may differ.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm looking through here really the outline for the book, and there's a chapter in here on negotiating investment terms. And I just think of the first thing that comes to mind is Shark Tank on this, right? Like, so you've got an entrepreneur who's passionate about their business. It's making money. It's growing. They have an opportunity to take on investors, but this is a foreign language to them. They're just, ripe for the picking or to be taken advantage of here. So what do you talk about when it comes to this topic?
Well, I actually include in both this book and the other book, from each side of the table for entrepreneurs and for investors, an annotated term sheet where I have taken one of the best industry term sheets, which we actually wrote for Gust together with the investors and entrepreneurs at New York Angels. And it is a middle of the road, really rational, really professional, typical term sheet that an angel investor or angel group or early stage seed fund would have with an entrepreneur about funding. And I walk through it, and in the book, I annotate every paragraph of the entire sheet to let you know exactly what's being said here, why it's being said, and what things are better for entrepreneurs, what things are better for the investors going through. So there are some great books. My book, Angel Investing, my book, The Startup Checklist, are both great books for entrepreneurs who are wondering about it. There are other books like Venture Deals by Brad Feld, a more technical book called Term Sheets by Alex Wilmerding. So there are books out there to learn from it. In essence, it is ultimately straightforward. The investor will invest, X dollars, which they will get Y% of the company, and so on and so forth. It's where things get into details that they get very, very tricky. But the interesting thing is, if the only experience that you've ever had is watching Shark Tank for investments, as I've said before, Shark Tank is to angel investing what Indiana Jones is to archaeology. It's completely unrealistic. You would never, ever
popcorn.
See that. Yes. But more than popcorn, it's designed for. And by the way, I love Shark Tank. Most of the sharks are actually very good friends of mine. I love the show. I watch it religiously. But it really isn't angel investing. It's TV. It's reality TV, and it's a great reality TV show. But for example, never, ever, ever would any investor say, "You're dead to me," or "It's an 18-second shot clock to accept myself." Right. That just doesn't happen. Angel investing is much more collaborative than it appears on the show. And angels are generally much nicer people, much more tolerant of challenges, trying to be helpful even if they're going to pass on investing. So watch Shark Tank for fun. Don't watch it for business rules.
Yeah, no, I think the my favorite part about Shark Tank is the fact that it's making entrepreneurialism a bit more popular, and it's bringing it to the masses and putting it out there, in front of a new audience, which I think is the biggest blessing that it's brought. So I'm trying to think here. You've covered a lot. You're just like an encyclopedia on this subject matter. What do you feel is really important that we haven't discussed so far that you think every entrepreneur, specifically someone, let's say in my shoes, really needs to be aware of and focus on?
Well, in I think chapter 4 or 5, I call it Building Your Dream Team. And it's about sort of finding co-founders and deciding what your founding team looks like. And the one key takeaway there, and I spend several pages on this, is to try and figure out who is the entrepreneur. Because it's not that everybody in the world should be a founder. Everybody in the world should not be a founder. Most people who are experts who study this will tell you that in terms of natural, real entrepreneurs, it's maybe 1% of the population. That's 1 out of 100 people really should be starting a company. And so part of the challenge of all of the glamorizations going on now for early stage startups, whether it's things like Shark Tank or The Apprentice or all these reality series, is that the idea is everybody should be an entrepreneur. And that's a very different thing from saying anybody can be an entrepreneur. If you If you are the kind of person who should be an entrepreneur, there is nothing stopping you today from being so at all. And so that means it's incumbent upon you to figure out, are you the entrepreneur? Because entrepreneurs are the one person in the whole mix who is not entitled to life-work balance. So if work-life balance is important to you, that's an indication that you are not the entrepreneur. You could be a co-founder, you could be the CTO, you could be the whatever it is. But in my experience, entrepreneurs willingly give up work-life balance. They lead stressed and strained and crazy lives, the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. But it's absolutely critical to them. They have no other option. I mean, you take somebody like me, you put me on a desert island, and I will figure out how to sell coconuts to seagulls or something or other. That's sort of typical of an entrepreneur. So that doesn't mean you can't start a company if you're not one of these people who are innately entrepreneurs. It just means that you need to find one of those to partner with. Because there are plenty of co-founders who are the technical co-founder or the biz dev co-founder or the sales co-founder, and those are all great and perfectly realistic. But somebody has to be the entrepreneur. And the question you would better ask yourself if you're thinking of starting a company is, am I that person?
Couldn't agree with you more. I'm just sitting here, you're naming off those things. I'm like, yep, live that one. It's a mad but unbelievably exciting way to live, for sure. When it comes to attracting your core team, I mean, ideally, you're going to look for the most successful people that you can possibly get on the bus. How do you approach recruiting, if you will? Do you have a specific methodology or secrets of the trade when it comes to that?
Yeah, and it took me a very long time to figure it out. It's a book called How to Think About Hiring by a guy named Lex Sisney, Sisney. His seminal book is a book called Organizational Physics. And you can find more about it on his website at organizationalphysics.com, where there are links to the books and much of his material there for free. And the whole point about organizational physics is you want to reduce entropy within your organization so that it's functioning lean and mean and efficiently. And one of the key ways to do that is when you're hiring people, you create what's sort of a new hire board, sort of like the NFL draft board, where you put down all the qualifications that you were looking for in a person, and you match them up as you see your various candidates. But what's interesting to me is that the number one thing didn't have to do with skill set, and it didn't necessarily have to do with, how much they were experience they had in an area. The number one thing turned out to be team match, personality match, zeitgeist match. Is this the right person to work with on your team? And if the person is the right person, then everything else can be made to work. But if the person is not the right person, then no matter how impressive they are, how skilled, what they generate in sales, or how good their coding skills, it can be a toxic world. And so the trick is to hire for people for the team's sake as part of the overall team. And a company with a strong team ultimately becomes a very strong company.
Is that process helped or evaluated? Or that compatibility evaluated with the help of, let's say, a Myers-Briggs or a Kolbe or a DISC test?
Partially. I mean, there are a lot of tests that you can do. And in his book and on his website, he actually has a number of tests where you can match your personality against the job and the other people's and the organization and so on and so forth. So I'm not sure that it's the 100% Myers-Briggs, classic, test, as it is figuring out what your personality style is. And so Lex divides the world into sort of, four types of things. There's the producer, the stabilizer, the unifier, and the innovator, PSIU. And so most people are combinations of these. And so the questions, are you a big P for a producer, personal producer, with a sort of an S for a stabilizer, and that's important to you, or are you, an I for, an innovator, who also like structure. And so once you figure out where that fits, then you can begin to see how the team fits together.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big fan of those tests, and everybody has their own magic formula when it comes to team building and hiring. So I always make sure that I ask everybody that question whenever I get the opportunity to. So we've got 2 or 3 more minutes here. What would you like to share with everybody here in conclusion? And I just want to say, actually, David, before that, thank you for writing this book. sincerely, because this happens to be where I'm at in my business career right now. And this is the information I've been trying to seek out and to learn, and to have someone with your level of experience encapsulate this in an $18 book. Like, thank you for that. This is a huge opportunity.
Well, my pleasure. I mean, so far it seems to have hit a nerve, and everybody who's read it seems to find it useful. And a bunch of accelerators are now standardizing on it. So if I, would leave your audience with one thought, it would be go get the book. It's called, again, The Startup Checklist: 25 Steps to a Scalable High Growth Business. And I wanted to make it accessible, so it's available in hardcover on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and every place else. It's available in digital form, Kindle, Nook. It's even available in audio form with me reading it at a slightly slower pace than I've been speaking today. So it's actually accessible in that way as well. And I'd love to hear comments from your audience once they read it, and feedback on the 25 steps and how they think it affects their business.
And where else can people go to connect and follow you? Are you primarily on Twitter?
I am on Twitter as at David S. Rose, DavidSrose. My website with full contact information and more background than anybody would ever want to know is davidsrose.com. And probably the place I'm most active is a website called Quora, Quora, which is a specialized question and answer site, or a generalized question and answer site, where I have sort of been a major player in the topics of startups and entrepreneurship and angel investing. And I answer questions there routinely, some would say addictively. So I've got over, close to 5,000 answers on Quora that people will randomly write in and ask questions, and I'll answer them. So that's a great place to find me.
That's awesome. So aside from the book, obviously, and I'm gonna, guys, make sure you check out the blog page for a link straight to the book, or obviously just type it into Amazon. I've already got my copy on the way. Aside from the book, David, what do you need help with most? Personally, professionally, what can we help you with? I mean,
aside from all the personal traits and being more, as my father has said, he is extremely inefficient, but is remarkably effective. So I would buy the same thing. I tend to, unfortunately, brute force things instead of doing it, working smart. I work very hard and fast and loud and full of energy, which can certainly overcome occasionally, doing things rationally, calmly the right way. So I would encourage all those entrepreneurs out there to do what I say, not what I do, and approach this calmly and rationally, and then apply your passion to it. But in my case, I'm always looking for interesting companies. My various websites and places to find me have information about the kind of deals and kind of opportunities I'm looking for. So if you think you fall within that range, and please self-censor. So I'm not looking for real estate, parcels. I'm not looking for biotech deals. That's not what I do. I tend to invest in early stage business-to-business services, financial technology companies, platform plays, frontier technologies, things like that. So if you have an interesting company or know of one from somebody else, a friend of yours, please let me know. Always look out for good deals.
I've got a suggestion I will hand over to you here in just a minute from a company that I reviewed yesterday. So, cool. David, thank you so much for the time today. This was an amazing opportunity and a privilege. And everybody, make sure you go get a copy of the book. It's called The Startup Checklist by David Rose. You can pick it up on Amazon, and make sure you follow him on Quora and Twitter as well. And thank you so much for joining us. If you love this episode, I know I did, please share it with your friends and family members and colleagues so they can benefit from this knowledge as well. Thank you guys so much, and we will see you next week.